Why do we remember bad news more than good news? Is the question that I will answer by the end of this show. Hello and welcome to another episode of The More You Know Mondays. The more you know, the more you grow. And this week on the show, I will be talking about Sylvester Stallone. But before I get into that, I just thought I would say Happy New Year. And if you are new here, didn't even mean that to rhyme. But if you are new here, welcome. Every week I talk about random, interesting facts, and I look deeper into them. Sometimes it's about people, sometimes it's about events in history, but it's always something new to learn about. Maybe it's new, maybe it's not, but you know, I just think more people should know about it. And if you are a returning listener, thank you for coming back. If you haven't already, I dropped on New Year's Eve 2020, I released Mental Gymnastics, which is an episode of My Opinion Means Nothing, and it's the best of 2020 episodes where you can kind of get a feel from the kind of the guests I managed to interview before the world went to what we are in right now. But that aside, let's start on with, you know, what we like to start with every week, which is Monday affirmations. It's just, you know, start with some positive vibes, so it's better to ease in with the start of your week. So this week, like with all weeks, we have a quote, and this quote is by Robert Greene, and it goes like this: "In general, obstacles force your mind to focus and find ways around them. They heighten your mental powers and should be welcomed." Now, I absolutely love this quote because it's so true, and I feel like it's very fitting with everything that's happening right now, with us being in lockdown and the pandemic. We're in a position which we can see as an obstacle because it's not natural or normal to what we are used to as the normal for us. So we see it as an obstacle, but at the same time, if you see within this obstacle, it's interesting to see how people are adapting to the obstacle and finding like there's still ways of they can get their stuff out there, or they can still make money, or even though there's other companies or businesses that are not able to still be functioning during this pandemic, and there are some people who aren't able to function, but it's just how you deal with the situation and what you do with, I guess, the powers that you have at B, and how you creatively craft the whole through the crazy, really, I guess. Obstacles, when you are faced by an obstacle, like call it like a brick wall, and you can't get over this brick wall because it's, 6 feet tall and you're only 4'2". This is just an example. And you're looking up at this wall and you're like, well, man, how am I going to get over this? Like, you've tried jumping and trying to grab onto the wall, but you haven't got like the upper body strength to pull yourself up. So you're thinking, well, how on earth am I going to get over this wall? Because I need to get to the other side. This wall is in my way. It's an obstacle. And the only way to really get past it would be to maybe find a ladder. And the thing about the ladder is outside of the box, outside of your box of thinking, outside of your box of, your focused vision at that time. Because your focused vision of that time is at the brick wall and the fact that you can't get over it. Instead of thinking, well, if I got myself a ladder, then I'll be able to climb up the ladder and get over the wall. It's just all about how you mentally, I want to call it mental gymnastics, because that's exactly what it is. Like, when you get faced by a problem, you automatically think like, well, how can I solve this problem? How can I do this? So it's all about being aware of what the problem is and thinking what the possible solutions could be. But then also speak to other people, because other people's perceptions and perspectives on things won't always be so similar to yours. So it's interesting, I find it very interesting anyway, to speak to other people and find out their perspective on things, because then it kind of formulates and fine-tunes your ideas, because you're like, well, I didn't really think about it like that, you know? And then when you say that, I didn't think about it like that, instead of it just being a thing like, okay, cool, I didn't think about it like that, and then just dismiss it, actually think about it like that. Because then you've actually taken on board the other person's thought and put yourself in that situation with that new, what can I call it? Idea. With that new idea of how you can see this and mentally how it could be possible with this new vision. But then you got to think, well, that's their point of view and it's not my point of view, but you can take parts of something and recontextualize it with your own visions and make something new, something outside the box, something that maybe you wouldn't have done in a million years, maybe, but it's a cool idea and you tried it and it worked. It's all about trying things and seeing what works. And I will leave that there. So my positive affirmations for this Monday will be to always try things and think outside of the box, because a lot of the time inside of your box is a safe space, so you would only think about what's safe for you instead of thinking about what might be right for you, if that makes sense. I hope it does anyway. So, with that being said, we will start the episode and talk about Sylvester Stallone. Now, I'm really inspired by Sylvester Stallone as a creative personally, only because he is someone who basically created his own history, created his own story in a sense. And I mean that in the way of, a lot of people don't know this, well, maybe people do, but I think there's 6 or 5 Rocky films. He wrote every single one of those films. And he also co-wrote Rambo, I think only 1 and 2 and 5, or 1, 2, 3 and 5. He co-wrote Rambo, and loads of other films that we'll get into, but yeah, he's a very inspiring man for me. So let's start in the beginning. Sylvester Stallone is his stage name, but his full name is Michael Sylvester Gardenzo Stallone, and he was born in Hell's Kitchen, which is a neighborhood of Manhattan in New York City, or I think I got that right. And he was born on July the 6th, 1946. And he is the eldest son to Francisco Frank Stallone Sr., who was a hairdresser and beautician, and Jacqueline Jackie Stallone, who was an astrologica, dancer, and promoter of women's wrestling. So Sylvester Stallone's father was from Italy, and he was born in Gio del Colli. I probably said that or pronounced that incorrectly, so do not slay me. I butchered it. If you know how to say it correctly, please correct me. And so he moves from Italy to the US in the 1930s, while his mother was American but of French descent. And interestingly, Sylvester Stallone also has a younger brother who's also in the performing arts industry, and he's an actor and musician, and he goes by the name. His name is Frank Stallone. Now, I find this really interesting, this part about Sylvester Stallone. Like, he has that signature like look, and it looks like one side of his face is kind of numb. But through my research, I've actually found out that the fact of his face being kind of paralyzed on the left side was due to complications that he suffered, or his mother suffered during labor while giving birth to Sylvester Stallone. Unfortunately, there were forceps that were misused, and accidentally this served as causing some nerve and paralyzing on parts of Stallone's face. As a result, the lower left side of his face is paralyzed, including parts of his lip, tongue, and chin, which coincides with kind of that, I guess, his signature kind of snarl and look, and his slurred speech, which kind of everyone thinks that it's from like some boxing accident or something, but it's part of him, you know? And another reason why it's kind of inspiring to me, because he has this, some people might call an imperfection, but it is part of him, and he owns it so well that, so what, you know? Like, he owns it, and that's what you need to do. Like, you need to own your shit. I'm sorry I'm swearing in this episode, but that's the only way I could put it into context. Own your shit. That's what you need to do. And then no one can really have power against you if you own it. Because whatever they say, you can just agree with them. Alright, cool, yeah. That's what you think. Yeah, cool. And at the end of the day, like, the only way when people tease you and all they're trying to do is get power over you. So if they say something to you and they see that it affects you, then they've won. So the way not to let it affect you is kind of, I guess, own it. But obviously this doesn't work in all situations, how I'm now thinking about some things that you can be called. But just, if it was just a physical imperfection, I mean, like what Sylvester Stallone does, he owned it and he made something of himself, and he built it into his characters by playing Rocky. But we'll get onto that in a bit. So, Sylvester Stallone's father and moved the family to Washington, D.C. in the early 1950s, and he actually opened a beauty school. And his mother, in 1954, opened a women's gym called Bar Bella's, which kind of gets you to think of like what inspirations he had around him while he was growing up. He went to many schools. The only noteworthy one that I'm going to name for this breakdown of Sylvester Stallone is when he went to the University of Miami in 1967. From 1967 to 1969, and where he was studying a drama major, which is kind of where it breaches onto his creative ventures. So what's also interesting, because his full name is Michael Sylvester Gardenzio Stallone, until 1969, he was appearing under the name Mike Stallone, because that's his first name. So that was his stage name before. So, but when it got to 1970, he started a different name. He decided to go by the stage name Sylvester E. Stallone, and the E part is pretty clever because it's kind of his Gardenzio broken in half without the Garden, or the Gar. Without the Guard, it's just Enzio. So he's just broken that part of his name off, which is pretty cool. The more you know, you know. So his first starring role was actually in a softcore pornography feature film, which was titled The Party at Kitty and Studs. Kitty and Studs. And this film came out in 1970. He was paid $200 for 2 days' work. And it said that Sylvester Stallone has later explained that he did this first film, this pornography softcore porn, out of desperation, because he was being evicted from his apartment at the time, and he found himself homeless for a couple of days. So he said that he was sleeping. He had slept for 3 weeks in the Port Authority bus station in New York. Oh, I know where that is. City, prior to seeing the casting for the Party at Kitty and Studs. Sorry. So he thought to himself, when he saw it, it was like either he goes to that casting or he robs someone. And it's a good thing he chose to go for that casting, because he got the role and he made that money so that he could survive on a little bit longer. But I think that's kind of really interesting, you know, especially being a performer, and for any other performers out there, it shows you the hunger and drive that he had for his art, and how much belief he had in himself that, you know what, I may be living on the streets right now, but I have a dream, and this obstacle may not be a part of my plan, but now there's this door that could possibly open in the form of the casting. And what do I do with this? What choice do I make at this point? Do I stay safe and stay homeless, or do I take the chance and go for the casting and see what happens? And funnily enough, what happened was a couple of years later, when this film was actually released, they changed the name to Italian Stallion in order to cash in on Sylvester Stallone's newfound fame. And Stallone also starred in the erotic off-Broadway stage play Score, which ran for 23 performances at Martin Quay Theatre. Probably didn't say that correctly, but I butcher a lot of things. If you know the correct pronouncement, correct me. Which ran from October 28th to November the 15th, 1971. Interestingly enough, The play score was later made into a film, which came out in 1974, which also goes by the same name as Score. And the most interesting thing that I found out about the film Score was that it was one of the first films to explore bisexual relationships. So that's kind of interesting. Although it was a kind of off-Broadway erotic play, so there is that at the same time. Anyway, fast forward some time, and Sylvester Stallone, he moves to New York City, and he's sharing a flat with his girlfriend at the time, who supported them by working as an actress. She was also an aspiring actress herself, but she was working as a waitress, and Sylvester Stallone also took some odd jobs around that time, where he was a cleaner at a zoo. He worked at a movie theater as an usher, but then he was fired for scalping tickets, which, if you don't know what that means, is basically like selling tickets underneath the table at maybe a higher or lower price, just not at the movie theater. And yeah, he also, in that time, he furthered his writing skills by frequently going to his local library, where he became really interested in the works of Edgar Allan Poe, who, if you don't know about, you should really check out. I should actually check out more of his stuff, because he is best known for his poetry and short stories. He is widely regarded as a central figure for Romanticism in USA and the literature as a whole. He is generally considered the inventor of the detective fiction genre, and further credited with contributing to the emerging genre of science fiction, which is really, really cool, but I don't want to go too deep into him because I want to do another episode on him. But yeah, just knowing that part about it just makes you understand more why Sylvester Stallone might have found him interesting, and how studying his works helped improve his writing skills. So by 1972, after having basically 2 erotic films underneath his belt, Sylvester Stallone was basically on the verge of giving up acting altogether. It's later described that this is kind of his lowest point, where he had tried and failed to get a job as an extra in The Godfather. He was relegated to a background role in the Hollywood hit What's Up, Doc, which starred Barbra Streisand. Though the most savage part about it is that he may have been paid for it, but you can hardly even see him visibly in both of those 2 experiences, or in his 2 appearances in that film, What's Up, Doc. You hardly even notice him there. So he was about to give up hope. He was at the end of his tether, as they call it, as they say even. Around that time when he was deciding to give up everything, a friend of his invited him to partake in a play that he was putting on, and an agent was in attendance while he was performing in the play. The agent thought that Stallone would fit a role of Stanley, which was a main character in The Lord of the Flatbush. which had a stop-start schedule because of budgeting issues from 1972 to 1974. So he basically achieved his first proper starring role because his friend asked him to partake in a play. He chose to do so, and there just so happened to be an agent in the audience that saw him and thought, you would look good in this film, and hooked it up and made it happen. And his journey had started. I'm going to fast forward over a couple of things because in between this time, between 1972 and 1975, 1976, he went through, I guess, a small spiral of going in and out of background roles where he played roles like a subway thug or a youth. But then he also starred in other films such as where he starred in films like Capone and Death Race 2000. He also made guest appearances in TV Police Story and Kojak, and apparently he was in Mandingo, but his scene was supposedly deleted. Or not supposedly, it was deleted because it wasn't in the film. So I'm going to move on to where he gained most of his worldwide fame, which is what most people know him for, which is his smash hit film series, Rocky, which came out in 1976. Which is a sport drama about a struggling boxer named Rocky Balboa, who takes on the heavyweight champion Apollo Creed. So, on March the 24th, 1975, Stallone saw Muhammad Ali versus Chuck Wepner. And he saw that fight, and that fight, after seeing that fight that night, he went home, and after 3 days and 20 hours straight, he had written the script for Rocky, the first Rocky film. Like, let's fathom that. My man was so inspired by watching the Muhammad Ali versus Chuck Wepner fight, from watching that film, that he went home and 3 days and 20 hours straight he spent on this script, and he banged it out, and he had Rocky. Another interesting fact is, although we have the film Creed, the original character of Creed was created by Sylvester Stallone when he created the first Rocky. So although Creed was, I think, written and directed by someone else, it wasn't until Creed 2 when Sylvester Stallone co-wrote on that one. I've said a couple times, but forget it. So, Sylvester Stallone, he denied the fact that Chuck Wepner had anything to do with his inspiration for writing Rocky. And because of this, Chuck Wepner filed a lawsuit against Sylvester Stallone, which was eventually settled for an undisclosed amount, which either means it was really high number or it was just like, you know, something they agreed on. But I'm gonna probably go with a really high number, because when it says undisclosed amount, that's what you usually think about. So, Sylvester Stallone, after writing this, he attempted to sell the script to multiple studios with the intention of playing the lead himself. But unfortunately, he was denied by multiple studios. And then he was approached by Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff, who became interested in the script and offered Stallone $350,000 for the rights. But they had their own ideas for casting ideas for the lead role, who included Robert Redford or Burt Reynolds, which would have made Rocky a completely different film. But despite that, Sylvester Stallone stuck to his guns and said, no, I'm not in. I want to play the lead. And eventually, after some substantial budget cuts to compromise, it was agreed he could play the lead. And which makes history after that. And it was said that around the time when the film was released, a critic, Robert Edber, stated that Stallone could become the next Marlon Brando. And he is another person who I will do an episode on. But for anyone that doesn't know who he is, I will just give you this brief insight of Marlon Brando. His career as an actor spun over 60 years, from 1924 to 2004. So, yeah, just put that into perspective. But we'll do another episode on him. But Sylvester Stallone still wrote, directed, and played the lead in Rocky. He got what he wanted. He got to create the vision that he saw for his script. He didn't settle for the paycheck. He didn't see the money and think, well, $350,000, that is a lot of money. And just sell these guys the rights, and they just made the film however they saw fit. He wanted to be a part of that journey, so he stuck to it. And I'm sure, like, if Irwin and what is their name? Sorry, Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff, if they didn't agree to let Sylvester Stallone be the lead, I'm pretty sure he would have just been like, alright, cool, I'll find someone who is willing to let me be the lead in my play, in my film. And then I will make it happen the way I want it to happen. In 1977, at the 49th Academy Awards, Rocky was nominated for 10 awards, which included Best Actor and Best Original Screenplay. Which was a nomination for Sylvester Stallone himself. The film went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, Best Directing, and Best Film Editing. So this film that was inspired by a boxing match, and he stuck to his guns to make it happen and make it be made and seen the way he wanted it to be seen, which is what led to Sylvester Stallone making his directorial debut and starring in the 1978 film Paradise Alley, which was a film, which was an American sports drama, which was again written, directed, and starred Sylvester Stallone. In this feature film where he made his directorial debut, the film tells the story of three brothers in Hell's Kitchen, New York, in the 1940s who became involved in professional wrestling. I have never seen this, but it sounds interesting, so I might check this out after recording this episode, actually. So, following this film. He also starred in another film that year, which was called Fist, F-I-S-T, which is a social drama in which he played a warehouse worker, which was very loosely modelling James Hoffa, who became involved in the Labour Union leadership. So, in 1979, he wrote, directed, and starred in Rocky 2. And I think this is very interesting, this point, because when he wrote Rocky 2 and he starred in it, he actually directed this one, which replaced John G. Addison, who was the director that won the Academy Award for directing his first film. Regardless of who directed it, not regardless of who directed it, I just mean that in the sense of when Sylvester Stallone took over directing the second Rocky, this film also became an even bigger success. It grossed $200 million. Wow. That's a lot of money. So, after Rocky, he became very popular for another well-known action hero, let's call him, which we know as John Rambo, where he starred in the action film First Blood. Very famous, dope film, which came out in 1982. And this film was both a critical and box office success. And the most interesting thing I find about this, about Rambo, is that critics praised Sylvester Stallone for his performance with John Rambo, because they said that he made Rambo seem human, as opposed to the way how John Rambo was portrayed in the book of the same name, which is very interesting. It takes quite an actor to make you see the human sides of a character, in the sense of he had to understand the character of John Rambo so much to be able to portray his flaws, or the way how he may have seemed in the book. I've never read the book of Rambo, but I'm just speaking from an actor's point of view. So he must have really embodied the character so much so that he was able to make you see the human side of his actions, which is amazing. Just as an actor, I can only just look up to that, because that's crazy. But I've seen it in Rambo. He does do that. Anyway, this launched the Rambo franchise, and later that year, 1982, Rocky 3 was released, which was also written, directed, and starred Sylvester Stallone. The third sequel became a box office success. Even though I can say that, in my opinion, Rocky 2, again, grossing $200 million, that sounds like a box office success again, but hey-ho, what do I know? In preparation for these roles, Sylvester Stallone embarked on a vigorous training regimen, which often meant 6 days of work, 6 days a week in the gym, and further sit-ups in the evening. So he claimed to have reduced his body fat percentage to his all-time low of 2.8% for Rocky 3. I don't know much about body fat percentages, but that does sound like a very low percentage. I'll look up this more deeper again after the show. So, in 1983, he directed Staying Alive, which was the sequel to Saturday Night Fever, which starred John Travolta, which a lot of people don't know is like the breakout hit for John Travolta. This was the only film that Sylvester Stallone directed, but he didn't star in, which is interesting. I don't think I have seen Staying Alive, actually, or maybe I have. But it was universally panned by film critics. Panned, despite being panned as a failure. Oh, savage. That means, so despite being critically failure, sorry, that makes more sense. Despite being critically criticized as a failure by film critics, Staying Alive was a commercial success, which is the main thing. That's all you can really hope for. The film opened with the biggest weekend for musical films ever at that time, with a gross of, is this 12 million? I think this number is 12 million. 146,143. Whoa. Wow. 12 million. Although Rocky did 200 million. But anyway, anything million is a big number, guys. I haven't got a million. Someone might have a million out there. If you're listening to this podcast and you have a million, well done, man. That's all I can say. But overall, the film grossed nearly $65 million at the US box office against its $21 million budget. I mean, that's dope. It was in the green. If it was a budget of 22 million and it grossed 65 million, then they made a profit, which is all you can hope for when making a film, because films do cost a lot of money, so you do want to make the money back on your return. But worldwide, the film Staying Alive grossed $127 million. Like, we need to remember that during the 1980s, Sylvester Stallone was one of the biggest action film stars in the world. So in 1985, he continued his success with Rocky and Rambo franchise, with Rocky 1V, which is 4 before 5, yeah, 4, and Rambo 2, Rambo First Blood 2, Part 2. It's also an interesting point, or interesting fact, I think, that Sylvester Stallone has portrayed these two characters, by meaning Rocky and Rambo, in a total of 11 films. Now, that is crazy. One of the characters he's created, and he's been able to one of the characters that he's created for about 11 times, or maybe half that, so let's call it like 6. 5. There's 6 Rocky films. Yeah, exactly 6. In 1977, and I realize now that I'm going backwards in time because we got to the 80s. But anyway, in 1977, for the first Rocky, Sylvester Stallone became the 3rd man in history to receive 2 nominations for Best Actor and Best Screenplay. The only other people in history to have ever been, or who have ever received these 2 awards, are Charlie Chaplin and Orson Welles. Wow. That's history right there. Like the other mentioned directors, they wrote and took the leading role in the film, which is cool and interesting. Sylvester Stallone is also known for his reoccurring roles in as Rocky Balboa and John Rambo, and also Barney Ross, who was the character he played in The Expendables. Sylvester Stallone wrote and starred in all 6 of the Rocky films, like we were talking about just a moment ago, while taking the task of directing in 4 of the sequels. Sylvester Stallone also starred and co-wrote the first 3 and the 5th installment of the Rambo franchise. And interestingly, he also directed the 4th Rambo film. So he co-wrote and starred in the 4th Rambo as well as directing it, which is really interesting because I didn't even know all this about I knew little bits and pieces, but I didn't know like he co-wrote all of these things, which makes his catalogue like kind of more interesting. So he also wrote and took the lead in the first installment of the Expendable films. He directed and starred and wrote in Paradise Alley. John Travolta starred in Staying Alive, which was a sequel to Saturday Night Fever, which Stallone wrote and directed. Oh, I did not know that. Well, that's interesting. Stallone also wrote and starred in Cobra and Driven. And he also co-wrote and starred in Fist, Rhinestone, Over the Top, Cliffhanger, and Creed 2. These are all like big like credits. I think that was the word I was looking for before. Not catalog, but credits. These are great credits, and it's really interesting to me that he not only was in these films, but he also was involved in the writing and the directing in some of these projects that he was involved in, which kind of adds this extra level of his importance to the film, or to the production rather. But yeah, like I said, he is an amazing man that has spun his career, I guess, since we're in 2020 now. It's 2021. But I guess it's only 1 year, so it's easy to make that mistake. And we're only 5 days into the new year, so who knows? Pretty much, it's still 2020, but we're in a new year. Happy new one. But yeah, his career has spun maybe about 50 years so far, and I'm sure he still has more years in him, because I was looking on The Expendables. There's 2 more or 3 more Expendable films that are in the pipelines, so I'm sure he will either be starring in or directing or co-writing or even just writing these films. So he'll be involved in this it's just really inspiring to find out about the journey that he's taken, where he's literally gone from nothing to something. Very, very inspiring. But we have got to the end of the show, and I have to answer the question that I posed at the beginning of the show, which was, why do we remember bad news more than good news? And the reason is because of this interesting thing that we all funnily enough have, which is called the negativity bias. And you might find this weird, or maybe more interesting. I found it interesting to find out about. Every human has a negativity bias. It's built into it. It's some sort of what can you call it? Like an adapted evolutionary function that has been passed on to us from our ancestors, other human ancestors, which is an adaptive evolutionary function from thousands of years ago, where our ancestors were exposed to immediate environmental threats that were no longer needed, that we no longer need to worry about, such as like predators, or I don't know, acid rain, or volcanoes erupting on a regular basis, maybe. And being more attentive to these negative stimuli plays a useful role in survival. So these negative biases are, for our ancestors, I assume, they helped them avoid potential harmful situations by them having the absence, or by them kind of being very wary of bad things. They were able to protect themselves and their flock or their families from bad things possibly happening to themselves, or happening to them or their family. And if you think about this, like really deeply, how I thought about it, it explains a lot, this negativity bias. It's seen everywhere, like in the news, on how they pose the news, or how they pose things out to be more dangerous maybe than they are, and which makes you remember them more, because we have a negativity bias. So we're always like, remember bad situations over good situations. And listening to this, you might be thinking, I don't have that. And I thought that in the beginning. I maybe have a lesser version of this negativity bias, but I definitely have a negativity bias, unfortunately. It's like, if you think about, for example, they did a study in 2016 for the Nielsen Norman Group, which studied kind of the negativity bias on this example. So you've checked into a nice hotel for the evening. When you enter the bathroom, there's a large spider in the sink. What do you think you're going to remember more vividly in your memory? The fact of your hotel being like finely finished and luxurious, or the fact that there was a spider in your sink? So the study that they did in 2016, the results came back that stated that more people would remember the spider incident more clearly than the fact of the room being nice. So obviously, like with most things, negative experiences tend to affect people more than positive ones. And this again was looked at in a 2010 article, which was published by the University of California. The Berkeley quotes psychologist Rick Hansen states that the mind is like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones. So you might think, why do people have a negativity bias? And I guess it's kind of, like I said, kind of at the start of this, it's based on, or built into our brains based on millions of years of evolution when it comes to dealing with threats. So our ancestors lived in a different time to we live in this comfortable time that we live in now. And they had to go out there in the wild and gather food while also avoiding deadly obstacles and predators. So for them, noticing and reacting to and remembering predators and natural hazards, which was negative, became more important than finding food, which was the positive. So with that kind of aspect in your head, you kind of understand why we have this negativity bias. But I think understanding it and being aware of it is the first step of being able to overcome it. Because it's kind of that thing where, like, you'll remember that time when you lost 20 pounds more than that time when you found or you won 20 pounds. And while humans may not need to constantly be worrying on high alert about our survival anymore, like our ancestors did, the negativity bias can still affect how we act, react, feel, and think. So like I said, being aware of it helps you combat it because you're able to think about it on a deeper level and address it, or address yourself and fix it if you can. But anyway, that's that. And I will call that the very end of the first episode of 2021. So I hope you've enjoyed the More You Know Mondays, and I hope you are having a wonderful start to your week. Thank you for listening all the way through if you got to this point, and enjoy the rest of your week, and we will be back next week with another installment. I was going to say slice, but then I had installment coming out of my mouth. With another installment or slice of the More You Know Mondays. And with that, I'll call it the end. Bye. Have a wonderful week.